shootings going on in the next building? Alright, from the bottom of my heart, I do not want you going inside.
At 10:48 a.m. on Thursday, March 12th, 2026, the Old Dominion University school community received an emergency alert that there was an active shooter on campus, and they were encouraged to follow run, hide, fight protocols. Within 90 minutes, an all clear was sent out as authorities were able to confirm the shooter was neutralized. Tragically, a local ROTC lieutenant colonel who bravely stepped in front of the shooter to protect his cadets, Lieutenant Colonel Brandon Shaw, was killed in the shooting, and another person in the room was hospitalized. Welcome to a special episode of True Crime 757, where we're talking about the recent tragedy at Old Dominion University. This one hit our community really hard. Many of the people that work in our newsroom, live not too far away from the Old Dominion University campus. Personally, I live just a few blocks away from where this all happened. I take my daughter on walks past Constant Hall all the time. So it definitely hit a lot of us in our family very hard. The human part of us really wants to react to the news, but we also know that we have to step into action in these situations, because the community wants to know what's going on. And Margaret, I was just wondering if you could kind of touch just a little bit on what a reporter does as soon as they hear about something like this and they get sent to a scene of a potential human tragedy.
Yeah, as I've gotten older and older, it seems to hit a little bit harder and harder every time we have to cover stories like this. But it's like you feel this like awful dread, knowing that this is happening right in an area. I used to live on 50th Street. I know so many people that went to ODU. We go to the games. It's so close to us as a community, and so many people, we see these kind of shootings on the news that happen far away. This is so much different when it's just a few blocks. But it is a story, like you said, people want to know, and they're going to want to know right now. So you really go into that like work mode, where you are reaching out to the authorities. You are trying to get updates as soon as possible. You are texting and calling people that you think might have some connection. And then you're also hearing from a lot of people also who are trying to get information from you, or they know that you're a reporter and they're, hey, I want you to know this. So it's coming at you in all different angles, and it can be super intense as that's going on.
Right. I mean, a lot of the content that we got of video from, a few minutes after the shooting was stuff that people sent to someone that they know that worked here, or, one of our, our assistant chief engineer, her, sister's daughter or something, just they have video, they're experiencing it in real time, and they know, that people want to see what's going on that campus. And, I think we as a news outlet believe that people do deserve to see what's going on, to see these, these things that are happening, because the facts in these situations are really important. And, with the media landscape that we live in now, a lot can get distorted. And but there are a lot of facts about this story that we know. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of those facts, the things that we know right now as the recording of this podcast that are facts. Mohammed Baylor Jallo, a 36-year-old current and former student at ODU. He was a Virginia National Guardsman and a convicted felon who had first attended ODU as a student around 2007. He entered the ROTC classroom in Constant Hall. He reportedly had a stolen gun that he had purchased allegedly from a man who's now facing federal charges. He asked in the room if they were affiliated with the Army, and when the confirmation was received, he yelled out the common Muslim phrase, Allahu Akbar, and opened fire on the class. Lieutenant Colonel Brandon Shaw attempted to intercept him, lunging at Jallo to protect his cadets, and apparently taking the brunt of the gunfire that ultimately led to his death. He died later that day at the hospital. Now, nearly a month after the shooting, the Army ROTC released a video featuring several of the cadets who were in the room that day. We'll play some of the segments from those interviews to hear the story in their own words.
Someone came in, just some random Joe. We have a class after ours, so we didn't know if he was just early, and there's been times this overlap before.
I was sitting in the front row, 2 seats away from the door, and he asked, is this the ROTC classroom? Probably waiting for the next class.
nervously says, you know, is this ROTC or is it a seminar? Nobody said anything. Nervously again, like says, is this ROTC or a seminar?
I said, I was like, yeah, like we're ROTC. I think Colonel Shaw was like nodding his head, yeah.
I wasn't thinking about what that question really meant.
He reached down into his waist belt.
He pulled out his gun. It was a Glock 44 .22 caliber.
And shouted Allahu Akbar and began shooting initially at the direction of Lieutenant Colonel Shaw.
Actually, like, started to happen. I was like, oh, this is real. And, like, everybody had dropped down to the ground. And
Myself and another cadet was sitting next to me, and we immediately go down to the ground.
I just immediately got underneath the desk. Since I was right there in the front.
With my pocket knife, I open it. I run up, and as I'm running up, Colonel Shaw lunges at the guy and starts wrestling with him upright.
I saw my instructor kind of lunge at him, and when I got underneath the desk, I saw them together. If he didn't lunge at him, you know, I wouldn't be here right now. You know, there's a possibility he could have turned his gun, and I could have been next.
He shoots one stray that way. He shoots another stray, and it hits me. It really didn't feel like it hit me. It felt like a graze. After that, I'm like, I can keep on going. So Colonel Shaw finally turns him around. So then after that, I'm like, I'm ready. So I just go in there, just start stabbing him. As I'm stabbing him, other cadets jump in.
And then after about 2 to 3 more shots, we both stand back up and see that Lieutenant Colonel Shaw and Encheta had already reached the gunman.
And then I saw a cadet in front of me. I saw his feet jump over a table and rush up. And so I said to myself, well, if he's going, I got to back him. And so next thing I know, I pop up, I run around the table, and then all I see is, I see Colonel Shaw grappling with the guy, some other cadets, you know, with the gun, and I just rush up there, help.
Yeah, he's getting stabbed by a couple different people. We're kind of throwing blows, wrestling with his hand, hand had a gun on it.
And we all fall on the ground. We're all in a pile. And because he's still a threat, I'm still stabbing him.
We did what we tried to do to get the gun away from him, and he wasn't letting go of the gun. And I just happened to have a knife on me at the time. And Jetta and I, we were like neutralized this guy.
And it wasn't until I was able to squeeze my fingers between the gun in his hand before I could rip it out. Upon getting it out of his hand, I dropped the magazine and pulled the slide back, which was 1 round left in it. The magazine was empty, but when I pulled the slide back, 1 round ejected. I put it on the table, knew that it was law enforcement would want it at some point.
I remember folding the knife, putting it back in my pocket. So I'm starting to feel a little bit of pain. And I'm like, guys, can you get off of me? I think I've been shot. So I get up, but then I sit back down. And I'm like, guys, I've been shot. Can you go and help me?
On an instant, we switched over to doing combat care.
It just was what I felt I had to do in that moment to get there and do what I could.
Several videos were taken depicting the chaos around Constant Hall at the time, including one that showed officers approaching the building, heavily armed, apparent victims being carried out of the building. Margaret, you spoke to a young man who captured some of those videos. What did he tell you about being there and his experience through that?
It was chaotic. He worked as a lifeguard. He was actually in the next building over, and he got video of people. You know, you can see them running out of the building, and then you can hear the screaming, which is like so, like it's just chilling to listen to.
The lights came on and off 3 times, and so we thought that was a little bit weird. So we opened all the windows so we could see the board. And then right as we opened the windows, we heard like a little gunshot, and then we heard the fire alarm go off. So we all looked out the window. and we saw people running and screaming.
And it was just terrifying. I mean, they're locking themselves in the room. They're watching out the window. You don't know where this person is or what's going on. I mean, I can't imagine the level of fear and concern that you have for yourself, but also everybody else on the campus, you know?
Right, you're in a lockdown, and again, it was 90 minutes from the time that the first alert went out until they got the all clear. So you're spending a lot of that time, especially if you're in that building, in a nearby building, really being concerned about your safety and whether, you know, what's going to happen to you. You know, people barricading themselves into classrooms and doing anything that they can to protect themselves. I really want to get into where the investigation stands, into what the FBI knows. The FBI is leading the investigation, and what we know about the man who's accused of selling Jalloh the gun. And we'll touch more on that when we come back from this break.
Your world changed in seconds, not by choice. But now you get to choose who fights for you. At Corsland Law, we don't just handle cases like the other firms. We go to war to get our clients paid for their injuries. Personal injury, real people, real stakes. Let us carry the weight. Free consultation, fierce representation. Corsland Law, because this fight is personal.
How it was an act of terrorism, I can tell you that we have confirmed reports that prior to him conducting this act of terrorism, he shouted or stated Allah Akbar, and he was formerly a subject of a FBI investigation in material supporting terrorism.
We're back with True Crime 757. We're talking with our investigative reporter, Margaret Kavanaugh, about the tragedy at Old Dominion University that took place on March 12th. The reported shooter is named Mohammed Jalloh. He was pronounced dead after authorities, entered the classroom. But there's a lot of information that came out about Jalloh after the shooting happened. So, Margaret, what do we know about Mohammed Baylord Jalloh?
ODU told me that he enrolled with them first in 2007 and was a student there for several years, undergraduate. We do know at one point he joined the Virginia National Guard after leaving ODU, and a few years later in 2016 is when he got into some legal trouble and pleaded guilty to trying to provide material support to ISIS. And that was a whole big investigation into what he had been up to. Now, the FBI said, and the AP had reported, that he was actually speaking to an undercover agent at that time when he thought he was speaking to, one of these terrorist groups. He tried to donate money, $500. That money was actually sent back to the FBI. They said that he told the undercover agent that he wanted to do a similar attack that had happened at Fort Hood a few years ago where there were 13 people killed. He wanted to just be part of this terrorist movement and all of this, right? That gets all exposed during his trial, and the judge orders him 11 years in prison for those crimes. So we know that he then goes to prison. He's supposed to go for 11 years, but he's let out about 2.5 years before the end of that sentence after completing a drug treatment program. He had said that he was, he had at the end of a relationship and that he was abusing mushrooms, marijuana, and alcohol to take the pain away, and that he was sorry of everything that he did. So that's what happened. And he actually got out in December, I believe it was the 23rd, December 23rd in 2024. Right before Christmas, he gets out. And then we know, fast forward, he enrolled at ODU again in this summer of 2025. So just about 7-8 months before now. So one of the things that has been a really important topic of conversation that's come up a lot, in government levels and also down to social media comments on our social media accounts is like, how did a convicted felon with the record that he had, how was he allowed
to apply and re-enter as a student at ODU.
Yeah, well, and also he was allowed to, he was not deported as a naturalized citizen despite the terrorism-related conviction. I know that was also really a hot topic, but all of that, like, how is this allowed? But under Virginia law, universities are not allowed to ask about criminal histories in the administration process. So, like, legally, they're not able to ask about anything like that.
On a college application, they can't have a question like, do you have a criminal history?
Yeah.
And that's a Virginia law, and it was passed a few years ago. We did reach out to the lawmaker that sponsored that law. We did not really hear back, just kind of wanted to hear, maybe because, in a lot of these cases, when a law like that comes forward, it's because of something that happened to someone and they want to try to right maybe a wrong that existed. But obviously, this is kind of the opposite situation where, a lot of people feel like, hey, maybe this person shouldn't have been, allowed to, first of all, remain in the country as a naturalized citizen after this type of charge. I mean, it's a very serious charge that he was convicted of, let out of jail early, and then allowed to re-enroll. The other side of that, a lot of people say like, well, maybe, criminal history shouldn't always be, people who have a criminal history shouldn't be barred from pursuing a college education, and I think a lot of people agree with that too. So it's a really complicated situation. But this incident really kind of highlighted a lot of those issues and these kind of loopholes that allowed for Jalloh to end up where he ended up on March 12th. So you talked about the naturalized citizen thing. So there's another effort that's happening right now at the congressional level. It's called the SCAM Act, and in fact, local Virginia Beach Congresswoman Jen Kiggins recently signed on as a co-sponsor. Can you tell us a little bit about what that act is about?
She's basically trying to make it so if you are convicted of something like this, you'd have to go. Like, you'd have to leave the country, and, everything that's going on with ICE right now, everything that's going on with this hot topic. I mean, yeah, she's introduced that, which would, someone like him in his circumstance would not have had the opportunity to do what he did at the ODU campus because he would have been removed from the country, as I understand what that is.
So that law has been proposed, and again, Congresswoman Jen Kiggins is backing that law, throwing her support behind that law. Another issue, and you can't really call this a loophole because it's really just an element of criminality that was enabled Jalloh to get his hands on a gun. A man named Kenya Chapman, who's a Smithfield man, he's in jail waiting trial on federal charges that he allegedly sold a stolen gun to Jalloh. It was a Glock 44 22 caliber. I personally don't know a lot about guns, but apparently Kenya Chapman had allegedly stolen this gun out of a car and then sold it to Jalloh for $100. So, but this wasn't the first time that Chapman was accused of this crime. Can you tell us a little bit more about his history of illegally selling firearms?
Yeah, so this was interesting when the indictment against him came out, the federal indictment. It outlined a lot of the details about how all this came to be, how he got the gun, all these things. He had been in trouble a few years ago for straw purchases. Basically, what that is if someone goes into, like, let's say I'm a felon, I want a gun, you go into a gun shop, buy it for me, and then sell it to me or give it to me, whatever you want to do. Then, I use that gun for problematic behavior. That's not exactly what happened with Jalloh. That wasn't a straw purchase. It was gun trafficking, basically. But anyway, Chapman had gotten in trouble for straw purchases in the past. He basically got a slap on the wrist for it. It said in the documentation that the Bureau of Alcohol and Tobacco and Firearms allowed him to write a letter of apology and gave him a warning, and then they got rid of those charges of him, the straw purchase charges with what he was doing in these other situations. Now it all came to light. It outlined in the indictment for this case how they tracked Jalloh's phone. They went and saw where he was going. They looked who he was talking to. And that's how Chapman's name got brought in. That's how he got involved in this whole thing. And now they brought back all those charges that he was originally kind of getting a little bit of a slap on the wrist about. And he's been charged with those. And then these new charges. Because that gun that was used, I believe it said that he had stolen it, or it had been stolen like a year ago. So he had this gun and was just sitting on it And then Jallo wanted it, bought it for $100, but it had been taken out of a car.
Right. And those old charges, it's just really interesting when you go through the federal indictment and you see that, they even tracked where the guns that he had straw purchased and resold, in 2021, were actually, one of them was used in a homicide investigation, or it was used in a homicide in Newport News, a little bit after that. So he had admitted to doing this in those according to those court documents. He signed a paperwork that said, hey, I admitted that I did this. This is my signature on the form to buy the gun. And they had him write this letter of apology, basically saying that, acknowledging that that's what he did. And then they let him off with this warning. And now they are bringing back those charges. So he's not just facing the gun trafficking charges with respect to Jallo, but he's also facing these 3 other charges of the straw purchases from years ago. Chapman pleaded not guilty, but the judge decided to hold him there without bail, awaiting his trial, which is currently scheduled for May. So, Margaret, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast for this portion. It's really important for us to really want to tell this story and put this all in one place. I really appreciate you coming in to add some of the context to this. And when we come back from this break, I will be here with our Norfolk reporter, Jay Green, talking about the aftermath and the impacts on the ODU community.
Your world changed in seconds, not by choice. But now you get to choose who fights for you. At Corseland Law, we don't just handle cases like the other firms. We go to war to get our clients paid for their injuries. Personal injury, real people, real stakes. Let us carry the weight. Free consultation, fierce representation. Corseland Law, because this fight is personal.
Afternoon, Faculty Senate members took a vote of no confidence against the university's president. The Senate chair tells me this is a result of a plan to condense online classes into an 8-week model starting this fall. Faculty tell me they're not opposed to the model, but feel the university is rushing into it. The Senate chair says the change is motivated by economics.
We're facing an enrollment cliff with fewer people being born, and so there will be fewer people of high school age. So our traditional students are essentially disappearing.
Welcome back to True Crime 757, where we're talking about the tragedy at Old Dominion University. This is the 3rd segment of our podcast. We're recording this on a different day, so if you noticed I'm wearing a different shirt, that's why. Now we have with us Norfolk reporter Jay Green. He's going to talk to us a little bit about the aftermath, about what's been happening on the campus since this happened. So many of you know, a few days before the shooting, the Faculty Senate, WTKR got word that the Faculty Senate was going to issue this vote of no confidence against University President Brian Hemphill. And then obviously the situation got very clouded by, the shooting, overtook all of that. But Jay, what happened on March 10th?
Yeah, so there's a very unusual situation that kind of unfolded here on campus. Basically what it boils down to, John, is that the faculty and the administration at ODU are at odds over online courses. And not just online courses in general, but taking a lot of the online courses and condensing them down to 8 weeks. So if you've got a full 16-week course load, a lot of professors and teachers are concerned that condensing that down into 8 weeks is just not going to work. They don't disagree with the idea. They think that an online learning environment is what a lot of people are kind of hovering toward these days, and that's where higher education is. So there's no disagreement over that. But the faculty are concerned that it's just too much work in a little amount of time, and they're also concerned with using AI to kind of help condense their courses. They're concerned about their intellectual property and what rights they might give away if they're uploading this to AI. But the Board of Visitors backed Hemphill after that vote of no confidence, saying that it doesn't have a direct impact on his position. It's not like he was fired or anything like that. And they went on to say that really there's no obligations. They don't have to follow anything after that vote of no confidence.
Right. It was just kind of a procedural thing on behalf of the Faculty Senate to just say, hey, we don't agree with what the president's doing and we're issuing this vote. And the board said, thanks for letting us know, but there's not really anything that doesn't change anything for us, right? They still back him. They believe in his vision for the future.
And I want to add that it was about a year and a half ago that I actually closer to a year that I interviewed President Hemphill, and he floated out the idea of these 8-week courses, and he was talking about ODU wants to reach as many potential students as possible.
History, we just have fewer students that are coming to colleges and universities of that traditional 17 to 18-year-old.
They're not just looking at people on the Hampton Roads area, they're looking at people all across Virginia, all across the country, and these courses the administration feels is a better way to do that.
Right. Obviously, college is a very competitive environment, and this could help them remain more competitive by opening their doors, online to more and more students across the country. So, so that was on March 10th, and then it was almost not even 48 hours later that we learned about the shooting on campus. And of course, all of these issues that were lingering in the background between the faculty senate and the administration were, rightfully kind of put aside for a while on the back burner. But it wasn't long until they came back to the forefront. So what happened about 2 weeks later?
Yeah, there was definitely a boiling point. The faculty senate, and we received some of these, but brought up a 2024 email where a faculty member who taught classes inside Constant Hall where that shooting happened had raised some concerns directly with Hemphill about President Hemphill about those safety measures. One of the big ones was that classrooms that only lock from the outside. There was a safety concern about that, where there was a situation where a student was being stalked or followed or something like that, and so that concern was brought up. The faculty member said that they felt that not being able to lock the doors from inside left them vulnerable in the event of a mass shooting or some sort of immediate lockdown, and that they were worried that they wouldn't be able to protect their students if they could only lock the doors from the outside. And so what saddened them was they didn't see that the university really had any plan to address building in that security, or
right,
address security in that building.
Right, and that was pretty much a direct quote. What saddens me is I've had to come up with a plan, and the university does not seem to feel any need to address building security. President Hemphill responded to this faculty member and seemed to be, seemed to appreciate the reach out and to want to address the concerns. What else happened in that kind of exchange and in the aftermath of that email?
Yeah, I think it's important to note too, John, that President Hemphill responded within a day. I think it was 24 hours that the president responded. So it was a direct response. The university said that they provided active shooter training. I think they provided a couple of other trainings immediately following that concern back in 2024. But there was an email shared by the Board of Visitors issuing really the strong rebuke of the faculty senate, and the board shared again President Hemphill's response, and it was also shared. I think his response was included with ODU Police Chief Gary Shelton had a response as well, and they took that inquiry very seriously. But as the university said, they hold firm that they provided trainings and responded to that concern within an hour. That faculty senate wrote to the board on March 25th that it does not appear that, and this is a quote, "It does not appear that these problems had been addressed fully by the time of the shooting in Constant Hall on March 12th, 2026, roughly a year and a half after that letter was sent back in 2024. They go on to say the letter and the campus safety issue reflect only one of the faculty's concerns that have been dismissed by the president in his disregard for shared governance. And then the faculty wrote in a second message that same day, March 25th, just about a week ago, that they are calling for an independent campus-wide safety audit. They want to see what's going on with safety protocols and procedures. And they called the shooting the latest and most devastating evidence of a long-standing pattern of administrative mismanagement and disregard for campus security.
And the Board of Visitors did not take kindly to that. They very harsh in their response. I read all of these exchanges the day we got them, and I know you spoke to people on both sides of this argument, but they were. I mean, the word rebuke is probably not strong enough. They really were like, you are equating a terrorist attack with an unrelated campus matter. And these emails, this was all surfaced by the Board of Visitors. The emails were private, and the Board of Visitors publicized this in a way of kind of issuing that rebuke, so that people, they sent it out to members of the media so that we would see their response to the Faculty Senate. What else did they say what did the board say in their email?
So, as you said, they didn't mince words at all. They said that they reviewed the emails that they had been sent with profound concern, and that they really came back to the faculty and Senate and say, hey, you are trying to use this tragedy as a way to advance your agenda. And they called it inappropriate, unprofessional, fundamentally misaligned with the values of the university. I spoke with Kimberly Osborne. She's a spokesperson for the university, and she said all of those things.
For faculty and staff to blur the lines and to try to connect an act of terrorism to leadership is unprofessional. It's disrespectful to the victims and the experience that members of our campus community had on that terrible day. This week, our campus community has come together in love and in care for one another as they try to heal from the tragedy. And this action of the Faculty Senate is counter to that. They're using a terrorist attack to further their own agenda.
Their agenda being, reverting back to this no confidence vote in President Hemphill, and their desire to maybe see some changes in leadership. And the Board of Visitors, they went point by point, trying to address the issues that were raised in that initial email, saying this was the issue that the faculty member in Constant Hall raised in 2024. This is the action that was taken. This was the issue raised. This was the, this was the action taken. But obviously the Faculty Senate is still saying, well, clearly because of the shooting, and I remember when you talked to the Faculty Senate chair, Corinne Allen, she was pretty clear. She said, the incident on March 12th kind of speaks for itself, and they're really, without directly saying it, it seems like they're really, putting the two, the lack of action and what happened on March 12th, somewhat connected.
Whenever there's a crisis, it falls back to leadership and what prevention the leadership has given to prevent such crises. And I think that what the Senate would like to see and what reportedly is going to happen is a full health and safety audit of not only the main campus, but our other campuses as well.
So it's tense over there now, and obviously the horrible tragedy that happened on March 12th, it served to kind of amplify this splintering between the two groups.
This comes at a time when people might be considering ODU as a path for higher education for themselves, and so this could have an impact on a lot of high school students making decisions for where they're going to go next year, or even graduate students of where they're going to continue their studies. So it'll be interesting to see how all that pans out.
Right. I mean, we're recording this, at the beginning of spring, which is college admissions time, and so a lot of students are receiving their letters of acceptance and making those decisions, and obviously, learning about what's going on at ODU could impact, a student and their family's decision about whether they want to go.
I do just want to put out, one statement that the university has shared over and over again, and I think it's a huge point to make for them, is that they say they care about safety of all their students and staff.
So, of course.
So they say they are trying to do their best to align with all of that. So I want to make sure we get that out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's an important point. Obviously that has to be the highest priority, because if, you are inviting people not just to take classes there, but for many thousands of students to live in and around that community. And if they don't feel safe, then then that impacts everything about their experience.
It's an open campus too.
Right.
Like it's a public university. It's a beautiful campus.
Right.
You and I could go walk through any time of day.
Yeah, I mean, as I noted, in the earlier segments that I recorded with Margaret, I take walks with my family through that campus, almost nightly during the spring and summer and fall, because it is so beautiful, and it is right down the street from where I live, but yeah, that also comes with the other side of that, is that anybody could walk on campus at any time. Anyway, Jay, I want to thank you for coming on to talk about this part. It's a really important part, and I think people really benefit from hearing this side and from appreciate you doing the due diligence of reaching out to the university and to the faculty senate to hear from them directly, so they can add some context to these emails, because obviously it's a lot to read, and but I think sometimes just hearing it from that spokesperson makes a big difference.
Sure
thing. We'll be sure to keep you all updated on air and online and on the podcast as new developments are made in this case. We've got the FBI investigation into the shooting itself. We've got the federal case against the man accused of selling Mohammed Jalloh the gun, and we've got whatever's going to unfold on campus in the coming weeks and months. So we'll be sure to keep you updated. Thank you for joining us for another episode of True Crime 757. I'm John Sham, and we'll see you next time.